Testimony that I'm going to share with you tonight actually happened in 2006 is when the accident happened that I had. But we owned our own business. I quit working for a place that I was working for. I started my own business. I did on-site diesel repair. So I had a utility truck with all my tools and equipment on it, and I would drive from place to place. They had their own mechanics and they had their own facilities, but what they didn't have was the special tools or the special training to do the technical jobs on the engine that I was trained in. And I was called in because this engine was leaking coolant. Antifreeze was leaking out. And so it was in the middle of the engine. I had to take the engine all apart to repair it. And in order to test the repair, we simply were going to run the engine. So it's Thursday night. I'm wiping my tools off, and the other mechanic who worked on site at this logging company, he jumps up inside. He starts the engine. Now, the truck wasn't totally back together. There was still some things that needed to be put back together, but it was all stuff that he could handle, stuff he's going to take care of the next day. So as far as my job, as far as what I'm doing, I'm done. I'm wiping my stuff off. We're running up. It's been running. The truck is running 15, 20 minutes because I'm just like minutes from walking out the door. And right at that moment, the guy comes up and taps me on the shoulder. And he says, "Hey, before you go," he said, "can I just have you look at one more thing?" And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "I've got a dirty spot on the front of the engine." He said that I believe is an oil seep. And he said, "You can just diagnose it and come back at a later time, order the parts. We'll reschedule it, come back later to fix it." He said, "I know you can't fix it tonight or anything, but then we can kind of get a jump start on this." If you were to look, if you're standing in the front of one of these big trucks and look at the front, what you're going to see on this truck is a big chrome bumper in the front. It's a long nose, we call here, or conventional. And so that hood is open so I can work on the engine. But if the hood was shut and you're looking at the front, you're going to see that big grill, the headlights, the grill, the bumper, and there's just going to be a little bit of space between the bottom of that front bumper and the ground. And in this case, in this garage, it's cement. And so if you were to get on your knees in the front of the truck and look underneath the truck, from the front to the back, under that gap from the bottom of the front bumper to the ground, so if you get on your knees and look underneath there, what you're going to see is the lowest thing to the ground is the front axle. And so there's just a little bit of space between the bottom of that axle and the ground. And it depends on the side of the wheels. And so I got on a tool that mechanics use called a creeper. And so we're going to lay on this tool. It's got little wheels on the corners, and you roll underneath the vehicle. So I laid on his creeper, and I rolled on my back. I'm laying on it, and I roll underneath the front bumper, just enough room for me to squeeze underneath this front bumper. And as I'm positioning myself, I'm just going in deeper underneath the front of the truck, underneath that engine. And I said to Leonard, the other I'm working with, the other mechanic, I said, "just go ahead and shut the engine off. The bumper is back here behind my head." If you can picture that, I've slid underneath the front bumper to the point that I'm all the way underneath the truck. And that axle is about this deep, front to back, maybe. And again, it's maybe this tall. And that axle is held up because the wheels are on each side, and it's carrying 5 to 6 tons of weight, so 10 to 12,000 pounds of weight on the two front wheels. Leonard had removed the passenger side front wheel and put a jack underneath that axle. I looked underneath the truck before I went underneath it, and I realized that a jack was holding up half of the front of the truck. I went underneath the truck. Now I'm laying directly parallel with the center line of the truck, directly underneath the engine, and it just so happens that axle is directly above my belly button, basically from the bottom of my ribs to my pelvic, right across the middle of the soft part of my stomach. I'm looking at the bottom of the engine, bottom of the truck. He gets inside to shut it off. It kind of shifted a little bit. And when it did, I saw movement in the peripheral vision of my left eye. And I remember turning my head just a little bit to look over to see what was moving. And when I did, the jack that was supposed to be holding up the truck was wiggling, and it shot out. And when it did, this whole 5 to 6 English tons of weight falls through the middle of my body and crushed my body in half. The piece that fell in on me, again, is like about that deep front to back and about that tall. So when it fell through me, my body was literally pressure crushed in half. It didn't cut me. It just pressure crushed me. I was thinner than my spine because my L4, L5 vertebrae in my back were both spider cracked and broken on the left side of my body. So this thing falls down. If you can imagine this, the loudest noise you've ever heard. So 5 to 6 tons of weight, 10 to 12,000 pounds of weight of steel dropping that far and then hitting the cement. It just made like a bomb noise. It was just like a boom. So this thing falls through me, and on impact, blood shot up out of my body, out of my mouth. Blood shot out. I looked down, and then I just called out and I said, "Oh, Lord, help me." And when I say, I can't even tell you how bad it hurt. The pain was off the charts of this truck falling and crushing me in half. But, you know, I called out Lord. When I say Lord, I just want to make it clear, I'm referring to Jesus, the same one that as a 5-year-old child, when I said, you know, Jesus, if you're real, come and hug me. And he did. When I said Lord, I was referring to Jesus. So I call out, I look down, you know, I'm crushed. The pain is like over the top. And the other mechanic, gets down to the truck, and he's looking at me and I'm looking at him, and he had never shut the engine off because the jack had slipped out before he could shut it off. And so the truck is still running. These big diesel engines vibrate because they have a lot of compression and gear drive and stuff. So it's got me crushed to the floor. It's got my vertebrae crushed down. That creeper is flattened out, and it's vibrating on top of me as it's running. And I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and he was going into shock, seeing my body in half. I'm obviously in shock, and I'm looking, and he's not. He just froze. And I started to say, please. And I was having a hard time talking because of my body being crushed, obviously. So my diaphragm was pushed up into my ribs. My ribs were, or my lungs rather, were partially collapsed. So I'm saying, you know, call 911, call 911. I'm begging him to call 911. And he finally shakes out of it. He calls 911. Well, where this was in a very, very rural area. So they don't have a regular fire department. It's a volunteer fire department. I don't know if that's common where you folks live, but here where we live, if you're in a very rural area and there's no fire departments, it's just guys sign up, they put you on your page or whatever, and when something bad happens, all these people who sign up, and you know, they call and then they rush from wherever they're at, their home, their job, to the fire department, get in stuff. So it takes a lot longer if you have a volunteer fire department in a rural area, is why I'm saying that. So it's a volunteer fire department. He calls. The first 2 guys get there. Again, it's 2006, so it's previous to smartphones. The first 2 guys get there, and the very first man comes in. He sees me, and he knows there's no local hospital that can do anything, so they call MedFlight. And so they're talking to me. I'm trying to talk to them. I remember trying to communicate, and they said, when I talked to them later, they said I was basically just mumbling. They couldn't really understand what I was saying. And so I'm just going to back up. The man that I was working with, I mentioned him already, Leonard. He's the one that has called 911 before the workers get there, before the 911 volunteer fire department gets there. He's called them. He's gone and got the jack, and he can't put the jack underneath the truck to get it off me because the axle is literally on the ground. So he can't put it underneath it to try and get it off me. So he's trying to figure out before the volunteer fire department shows up, because it's taking him so long. He's trying to figure out how to get it off me. So he slid that 20-ton bottle jack. It's just a little hand pump bottle jack cylinder, and he slid it underneath the front axle. So I'm laying on the truck, if you can picture it. The driver's side is to my right as I'm laying underneath the front of the truck, and the passenger side is on my left. And I'm looking over at the passenger side front wheel that's removed, and the axle's on the ground. And so he slid that jack up underneath the suspension of that axle, that big leaf spring that's connected to that front axle, because he couldn't put it underneath the axle itself, if that makes sense to you. So he's got it underneath a big curved leaf spring, the jack. But it's hard to jack something up. It's not safe to jack something up on a curve. You want to jack something up on a flat, not on a curve, because otherwise the jack's going to slip. So I'm looking at it. The jack's in a bad spot, and I'm telling him, don't jack it up there. It's just going to slip, and it's going to hurt me more. And he's jacking it, and he's saying it's the only spot I've got. And he's jacking up. So he's jacking up, and I'm watching the jack slipping as he's doing it, finally caught. So the jack is up in the air. The truck is now off me. Now I can see my body for the first time, the whole body. Because before, when the truck fell on me, I could only see from my ribs up because it fell through the middle of me. So just my ribs up, and I just had when it fell, there was only about one, just trying to picture this big steel I-beam is falling through the middle of my body. And there's only 1 inch of airspace. There's only an inch between the bottom of that axle and the cement on my left side. So I knew the left side of my body was approximately 1 inch thick, and maybe double that, maybe 2 inches on the right side. So, not much space between the bottom of the axle and the cement. My body's crushed. He jacks it up off me. Now I can see my whole body again. And what I saw was I had a work uniform on, and my work uniform went to the edge of my ribs. It went straight back towards my spine. It followed along my spine. It came back up in my pelvic. So I had this just ridiculous flat spot in the middle of my body. And when I could see it now for the first time complete, it was so surreal that the only thing I could think of is, and a lot of people laugh when I say this, but it seemed cartoonish. That was the only thing I could think of looking at my body. It seemed like something that I had seen on a cartoon.